We're going to take a look at the Gemara on the bottom of Samach Ches Amid Beis. And this Gemara is addressing the issue of Hana mi Bigdei Kahuna. Can the Kohanim benefit from wearing the Bigdei Kahuna Shalo B'Shas Avoda? And the reason why this Gemara is here on Daf Samach Ches Amid Beis is because it's an analysis of our Mishnah. B'Diktani, our Mishnah says that when the Kohen Gadol finishes the Avoda and he goes into the Ezras Nashim to read from the Sefer Torah, Kore be'itzlis lavan mishalo, which means that he's allowed to wear his own private white garbs, robes. They're not Bigdei Kahuna. Bichlal, let's derive from this the Kriya Lav Avoda, that if Kriya was an Avoda, he'd be obligated to wear Bigdei Kahuna and Dafka Bigdei Kahuna, because no Avoda is ksher without Bigdei Kahuna. But in this case, Kriya, reading the parsha of Achrimos on Yoma Kippurim, is not an Avoda. And therefore, if it's not an Avoda, it doesn't require Bigdei Kahuna. Uktani, and the Mishnah says in Rotza likros for Bigdei boots, Kore. And that means that the Kohen Gadol has two choices. That's the emphasis on the phrase in Rotza. If he so desires, he'll wear Bigdei boots. He could wear his Bigdei Kahuna and read the Sefer Torah. If he doesn't, he has another option, and he could wear an itztalis. He can wear his own private, ordinary daily garments. But the very fact that the Mishnah offers him that option of wearing Bigdei boots, and we're not dealing with an avoda shma mina, we should certainly derive from this Mishnah that Bigdei Kahuna nitnu lehanos mehen, that he would be allowed to wear his Bigdei Kahuna even shalom b'shas avoda. So the Gemara rejects it. Dilma shiny kriya did tzarech avoda, that perhaps reading the parshios is not like any other secular, mundane, ordinary activity, but rather it's tzarech avoda. We have to upgrade it to the status of tzarech avoda. Again, it's not an avoda mamish, but it's enough of it tzarech avodas hayom, such that we're allowing him to wear his Bigdei Kahuna. But if it would have been Shalol Tzarech Avoda Klal, then the Mishnah would not allow him to wear Bigdei Lavan, Bigdei Bad. So just to summarize, we're being medayik from the Mishnah that there are two options. When he reads the Sefer Torah, he can either wear his ordinary daily begadim, or he can wear his Bigdei Kahuna. From the fact that he's allowed to wear his ordinary begadim, we see it's Lav Avoda. And yet, the Mishnah offers him another option of wearing his Bigdei Bad. So we see that it's mutter for Kohen Gadol, or for any Kohen, to be nene, to benefit and wear his Bigdei Kahuna, even if it's Shalom B'Shas Avoda. And Gemara says, no, Kriyas HaParsha, although it's not exactly an Avoda, but it has a status of Litzarech Avoda. And that's where they would matir, they would allow him to wear his Bigdei Kahuna. But if he would have been involved in just a secular activity, which is not Litzarech Avoda, then he would have to wear his ordinary daily begadim. He could not wear the Bigdei Kahuna. The boilon, we have a suffix, Bigdei Kahuna, nitnu lehanesben, or lo nitnu lehanesben. And in the yeshiva, they vacillated back and forth on this very issue. Are you permitted to benefit from Bigdei Kahuna, meaning Shalom B'Shas Avoda, or no, you're only allowed to wear the Bigdei Kahuna B'Shas Avoda? Tashma. Now the Gemara is going to quote a Mishnah in Masechet Tamid on Daf Chafei, and from this Mishnah, we're going to derive a conclusion regarding this suffix about whether Bigdei Kahuna nitnu lehanesben or lo nitnu lehanesben. The Mishnah says, Lo hayu Yeshenim the Bigdei Kodesh, meaning that if the Kohanim would want to sleep overnight so they could get up early the next morning and start their avoda, they would not sleep in Bigdei Kodesh. They would have to remove their Bigdei Kahuna, and the Mishnah says they would fold it up and put it under their heads and use it as a kind of a pillow. But for covering their bodies, they would need to cover their bodies with a regular, ordinary, daily garment. And now the Gemara is going to be medayek from the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Sheda hu delo. There's a special reason why the Mishnah prohibits sleeping in Bigdei Kahuna. And that's called a concept that we're familiar with from Masechet Brachos regarding tefillin. Hashash shemi yafiach b'hem. He might pass air while he's sleeping. And that's a gnai, that's an insult to the Bigdei Kodesh, the Bigdei Kahuna. And Achila, however, let's say, for example, if there was no serious suspicion that he would be mefiach b'hem, ha-mechal achli. Apparently, the Mishnah would allow them to eat their kodshim, even though, again, Achilas kodshim is not an avoda per se, but they would be allowed to eat kodshim while they're wearing Bigdei Kahuna. So let's derive from this the conclusion that Bigdei Kahuna nitnu lihenos mehem. Gemara says no. Just like we said earlier with regard to Kriyas HaParsha, that although it's not technically an avoda, but it's l'tzarech avoda, it has an upgraded status that could allow Bigdei Kahuna. So too, Achila has an upgraded status. Why? Shani Achila til l'tzarech avoda hi. And here the Gemara invokes a very, very famous brisa regarding the kapara of the Bailim. It is we learned in the brisa. In the Parsha Miluim, at the end of the Sefer Shmos, it says, "V'yochlu osam asher kupar b'hem, v'lamed shakonim ochlim u'bailim iskaprim." That when a person brings a carbon chatas or carbon ola and he wants to achieve kapara, the kohanim sichrei kuda, they'll eat the basa. When they eat the basa, they generate a kapara on behalf of the bailim. And therefore, although achilas basa kodshim on behalf on the part of the kohanim is not technically an avoda, but nevertheless it has an upgraded status of litzorech avoda, and that's why they're allowed to eat while they're wearing the Bigdei Kahuna. But if it's shalom litzorech avoda klal, then perhaps it would be also. So now the Gemara wants to say, let's see if we can be medayik from this mission that we quoted in Tamid and be poshet the suffer. Shena hu delo. It seems that the Mishnah prohibits sleeping in Bigdei Kahuna for the reason that we mentioned earlier, and that's a unique phenomenon in sleeping. But walking, if they want to walk around in the Bigdei Kahuna, even if it's not l'tzarech avoda, they want to take a shpatzir, that they be allowed to do, even though they're getting benefit from wearing the Bigdei Kahuna. And here we have l'chora, a very clear-cut diuk from which we derive that Bigdei Kahuna nitnu le'hanis be'hem, and therefore you'll have to take a little tiyul while you're wearing your Bigdei Kahuna. Not so in the case of Shena, because in the case of Shena, the Mishnah prohibits that for the specific reason that applies to sleeping, namely shemi yafiach b'hem. The Gemara rejects bidinu. Actually, hiluchei namilo. Even halicha with Bigdei Kahuna would be prohibited. And now we'll turn to Daf Samach Tes. And it seems from the Gemara now that the Kohanim, as soon as they finish the Avoda, the very first thing they have to do immediately, not even walk around with the Bigdei Kahuna, they got to change into Bigdei Chol. So why then did the Mishnah in Tamid single out Shena? Why did the Mishnah tell me a bigger chiddush that even halicha is prohibited? And the Gemara answers, Seifa itzrich lei. The Tana had to tell me a chiddush about the Isur Shena and after about the Isur B'Shena. Why? Because of the Seifa of the Mishnah. And the Seifa of that Mishnah gives us a big chiddush that applies to Shena. And it's understood within the context of Shena specifically. What is that? That when the Kohanim go to sleep at night, if they want to sleep in the Mikdash and wake up early the next morning to start the Avodah, Hoshtin, Umekaplin, Umenichim, Tachas Rosheim. While they're sleeping, they will fold up their begadim and they will use the begadim as a cushion under their heads. And now the Mishnah is telling me that since they already took it off their bodies, then there's a big chiddush here. Because again, if we're afraid of Sheva Yafiach Mahem, we could have and should have perhaps extended that even if they're sleeping on top of the Big Day Kahuna. If the Big Day Kahuna are underneath their heads as a cushion, it's very close to wearing them. And the hafacha is going to be in the same general proximity, very close to the Big Day Kahuna that are under their heads. And we would have thought that that would be prohibited. So the Mishnah focuses its attention on Shena with regard to Big Day Kahuna to contrast the Reisha with the Sefer. The Reisha is when they actually sleep wearing their Big Day Kahuna. That's prohibited. The Sefer is telling me, but they're allowed to sleep with the Big Day Kahuna underneath their heads. And here, we're not considering it to have undermined the sanctity and insulted the Big Day Kahuna, even if they would be mefiach during their sleep, because the Big Day Kahuna are not wrapped around their bodies. So the Gemara says, you know what? Maybe from the Sefer of this Mishnah in Talmud that we've been focusing on, we can derive a conclusion about our original suffix. Why? The Kohanim would not sleep in the Big Day Kahuna. That was prohibited. But Poshtin u'Mekaplim and Icharos on Tachas Rosheim. Now, if they're using the Big Day Kahuna as a pillow, albeit they're not wearing the Big Day Kahuna, but Shmamina, Big Day Kahuna, Nidule Hanasbeh, to use the Big Day Kahuna for their purposes as a cushion under their heads, that itself is Hanon. And the Mishnah allows it. Rav Papa says, no, Lo Tema, you should not interpret the meaning of this Mishnah that they put it Tachas Rosheim Mamish. We'll add the word Mamish. They didn't actually use it as a cushion. Ela Ema, when the Mishnah says Mekaplin u'Menicharos on Tachas Rosheim, it's not literally Tachas Rosheim, but rather Kineged Rosheim. Now, in my translation, which I think is a little bit more challenging than the English translation, because I looked up the English translation and I wasn't satisfied with it. The Hebrew translation says, Keneged Rosheim means Al Hamita Tachas Hakar. In other words, they're not leaning their heads directly on the Big Day Kahuna. They're leaning their heads on the mita, on the flat mattress. But Tachas Hakar, the Big Day Kahuna, are cushioning them underneath the mattress. And the Chiddush now, according to Rav Papa's interpretation of the Mishnah, is that although you're not allowed to be nene from Big Day Kahuna, but that's only if there's some sort of direct hana when the body is either wearing the Big Day Kahuna or lying on top of the Big Day Kahuna. But if it's Tachas Hakar, then it's not Keneged Rosham. If it's not Keneged Rosham, it's not considered a Hana from Big Day Kahuna. So at this point in the discussion, although we don't have a clear-cut proof from the Mishnah in Talmud one way or the other, but it does seem that according to our Papa's interpretation of the Mishnah, we would have to come to the conclusion that Big Day Kahuna lo nitnu lahenas man, except for this kind of scenario where he puts the Big Day Kahuna outside Rosheim, but not underneath Rosheim. Now, how does this impact on tefillin? Would you be allowed to sleep on tefillin that were placed not under your body, but Kineged Rosheim, Kineged a Rosh? Amar Masharshia, based on Rav Papa's interpretation of the Mishnah in Talmud, they allowed the Kohanim to place the Big Day Kahuna samech l'rashayim, and we're not worried about Shemi Afiach Bahem because it's not around his body. He's not wearing the big dekuna around his body. If you go to sleep and you place your tefillin right next to your body, that's mutter. He's not wearing the tefillin. And even if he would be mefiach, it's not called a bizayin to the tefillin. Just like in big dekuna, it's not a bizayin. So too in tefillin, it's not a bizayin. Now, in my note here, he says that there's an additional chiddush in the Mishnah Talmud that even though the tefillin are very close to his body, lo chayshinan shemi is galgel be'emtza sheinasa. We're not afraid that maybe he'll roll over during his sleep, as we all do. When we talk kachia rosho munach al tefillin mamish, he may end up with his head lying on the tefillin, which is the equivalent of wearing the tefillin, and therefore afach would be also. But we're not afraid of that. And Tosfos Yeshanim says that the diuk of Rav Misharshir, based on Rav Papa, is not really crystal clear, because Rav Papa was talking about was just sort of rejecting a proof to the contrary. In other words, before Rav Papa, we thought that we could derive from the Mishnah Talmud that you're allowed to be nen because you're using the big dekuna as a cushion. Rav Papa only said, I'm not sure if that's what the Mishnah has in mind. But for Rav Misharshir to derive a halachic conclusion about tefillin based on Rav Papa, it's not justified. Rav Papa never interpreted the Mishnah Talmud in that way. He only deflected the raya, the proof that we wanted to bring for the Mishnah, that you're not allowed to benefit from big day kahuna. And he said, you know what, the Mishnah in Talmud is not necessarily a proof because the Mishnah is not talking about tachas Hashem, it's talking about near his head. So this kasha is addressed by the Tosfos Yeshanim, and he writes that since Rav Papa didn't say Dilma Keneged Rashayim, but rather Ema Keneged Rashayim, the language of Ema Keneged Rashayim sounds like he's holding that is the correct interpretation of Mishnah, and Keneged Rashayim would be permissible. We're not afraid of hafacha. Therefore, Rav Misharshir derived his conclusion with regard to tefillin. Now the Gemara wants to support Rav Papa in his interpretation of the Mishnah Talmud, that the Mishnah is talking about Keneged Rashayim. When it says in the Mishnah, Tachas Rashayim, it must be Keneged Rashayim. The Isal Kedaitach Tachas Rashayim Mamish. If you would interpret the Mishnah not like Rav Papa, but literally that it means Tachas Rashayim, then typically Mishum Kilayim, which means the following: that forget about the Isser of being Nene from Big Day Kahuna. I have a different reason to object and prohibit lying on top of Big Day Kahuna, because Big Day Kahuna have Kilayim and the Avneit. The Avneit is made of Tzemer Upishtin Yachtov, and you're not allowed to use Shatnez as a pillow. The Ika Avneit, and the Avneit, as we said before, is Shatnez. Unehi Nami did Nitnu Lehanis Behem. Even if you'll tell me that, as far as Kudshim is concerned, the status of Big Day Kahuna as Hegdesh does not engender an Isser Me'ilah, but nevertheless, Mishani Mikilayim. The Isser of Kilayim is a Hana Sheish Bo Levisha. Any Hana through Levisha is prohibited in Kilayim. And now we get into a whole issue which we had at the very beginning of Masechet Yoma, as to whether the avnei is or is not kilayim. The avnei of the Kohen Gadol certainly is kilayim, but the avnei of the Kohen Hechel to hold you around is an issue. We can square with the man the Yoma who says avnei shel Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. Zeu avnei shel Kohen Hechel. In other words, the Kohen Hechel had an avnei that was made of pishtan without semer, and it was not kilayim. And I made a mistake. I think I said mistakenly that the Kohen Gadol had kilayim. What I meant to say was the Kohen Gadol, in his big day lavan, has an avnei that's pure pishtan. It has no semer in it. Let me go over that one more time. L'man di'omer avneito shel Kohen Gadol. We're going, you see, I jumped the gun. There's a major machlokus about the avneito shel Kohen Gadol. Now the Gemara is saying that we can certainly understand the Mishnah if we hold like that man di'omer that avneito shel Kohen Gadol only had pishtan, and in his belt he did not have any semen. And according to that man di'omer, zehu avneito shel Kohen Hechel. In other words, the Kohen Hechel wore the same avnei made purely and exclusively of pishtan that the Kohen Gadol wore on Yom Kippur. So there's no kilayim. So therefore, if there's no kilayim, you can certainly use the Big Day Kahuna as a pillow without violating the Yisra of Shatnez. There may be another issue, and that's the issue of Me'ilah, of having personal private hana from Hegdesh. It means that the avnei of Kohen Hechel was different than the avnei of the Kohen Gadol, and that's based on a pasuk in Shmos Lamed Tes. Ve'es avnei sheish masdar tcheles v'argaman. Sheish is pishtan, and the other meaning that are mentioned here, masdar, tcheles, argaman. Mashdar, Tchelis, and Argana were all made of tzemen, which means that the avnei of the Kohen Hechel was made of kilayim. Not like the avnei of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. Is my kilayim? How do we justify the fact that the Mishnah says that you're allowed to put the Big Day Kahuna as a cushion, as a pillow under your head? Amongst the Big Day Kahuna is an avnei that we're going to into the Yoma says that the avnei of the Kohen Hechel was a mixture of tzemeru pishtan, it was kilayim. How then could the Mishnah in Talmud permit the Kohanim to sleep on the Big Day Kahuna as a cushion when the avnei in the Big Day Kahuna was kilayim? And l'chora, the only answer is to say that we shouldn't take the Mishnah literally in Talmud, but rather we should accept Rav Papa's interpretation of the Mishnah, that when it says in the Mishnah, Tachas Rasheim, it means Kineged Rasheim. B'chi Tema, the Gemara says, you know what, I could deflect this proof. Now, when you wear kilayim Shabbos, or you wrap yourself around kilayim, like a towel, let's say, around your body, wardrobe, that's levisha. That's halah. Halah means on top of your body. But now we're talking about hatzah. Hatzah means that the body is lying on top of kilayim. And we have a man di'omer that says that that's not a violation of shatnez. That's not called levisha. That's not even Allah. Because in Allah, the shatnez covers your body. Here you're lying on top of the shatnez. That's not levisha. And therefore, we would allow the kohanim to sleep on top of the Big Day Kahuna as a pillow, mamish, even if it's Kalayim, according to that man the Yomer who says the obligation of Kohen was Kalayim. Vasanya, and we learned in a Brisa, it says in the Pasuk Beged Kilayim Shatnes Lo Yale Lecha. And that means that the Torah prohibited not only Levisha, but also Halah. Brisa says, Al Mutter Avalata Mutter Latzio Tachtecha. According to the strict letter of the law, you're allowed to sleep on Kilayim. This became relevant way back in the day when they had those carriages, and it seems that there was Kilayim in the seat, the cushion of the carriages. The question was, were you allowed to ride on such a carriage? Because our Gemara says, even though according to Torah law, you're permitted to be matzia Kilayim underneath your body, but also lasos kain shema tikarech nema achas al besara. We're always afraid that maybe even one single chut of this beged might be folded onto his body. And then he violates the Isur Halah of a beged Kilayim, which is on top of his body. So that's the Rabbanan Isur here. But since Hatzah is Asur B'Kilayim, at least Midrabbanan, then we're going to have to learn our Mishnah in Tamid as referring not to Tachas Rosheim, that would be Allah, and so, but rather Mitzad Rosheim, like Rav Papa. The Gemara now once again tries to reject the proof that Rav Papa adduces from the Mishnah in Talmud. And perhaps you could say that even if they placed the begadim under their roshei of mamish, not like Rav Papa, it would not be a violation of the Isur Kilayim. Why? The mafsik le midi beni ubeni. In other words, there is some sort of a hefsek when they place the beged. They would add another beged, apparently. He says, "Hinichu beged acher lachtzos bein Roshem ubein avnei." What we have here is that even in the case of Hatzah, we're using the Kilayim as a mattress, which is also al kopan midrabbanan. That's only if there's no hefsek. But in our Mishnah in Talmud, it could very well be that they made a chatzitza and they put another beged between their head and the avneit. Like much of my I always think that if, let's say, you rent equipment on a, when you go out, camping, right? And they rent you, knapsacks or different kinds of things, but it's not yours. So what you do is, you make sure to put a sheet between your head and the knapsack because you don't know what kind of germs you can get or whatever, You can get kinin. Right. But here they did it, separating their head from the cushion of the Big Day Kahuna as a chatzitza, so that it would not violate the Isur of Hatzah B'Kilayim. Okay. So the Gemara asks, is this a possibility? But Amar Shimon Pasam Rabbi Shimon Levi Rabbi Mishum Kol Kadisha Shem Yerushalayim V'Eva Kedosha Yerushalayim Afilu Eser Matzos Zo Al Gabi Zu. This is the princess in the pea, and there's a beged shel Kilayim on the bottom of 10 mattresses. Also, lichon alein, you can't climb on the top of 10 mattresses. Right. Because when the Rabbanan prohibited using a hatzah, using the Kilayim as a mattress, because they're always afraid that maybe if there's Kilayim in the mattress, then maybe some of it, one thread of it would somehow cover your body. They made it as an absolute zera. No matter how many different matzos you put one on top of the other, it's always going to be Kilayim with an Isur also lishon alein. And therefore, we can again bring a proof to support Rav Papa's interpretation of Lalav. Why weren't the Kohanim worried about the Easter Kalaim according to the Yoma that the Avnei of the Kohen Hedger was Kalaim? Shmami, no, we must assume, like Rav Papa, that it's not to be taken literally of Tachas Roshem, but rather Kid Neged Roshem, Shmami, no. Now we have a dissenting opinion of Rav Ashi, who rejects Rav Papa. Rav Ashi, Omar Li Olam. What does the Mishnah mean in Masechet Tamid? Tachas Roshem. And we should derive the conclusion that there's no Me'ilah and that Big Day Kuna Nitnu Lehenos Mihen. And we brought a raya before that no, they didn't put their heads directly on the Big Day Kahuna, because if so, it'd be difficult. How would they be allowed to do so? Well, Misani Mikalayan, I have an answer, says Rav Ashi. No problem of Kilayim. The only issue that you can raise here is Me'ilah and Hanof from Big Day Kuna, and the Mishnah is telling you there's no Iser of Hanof from Big Day Kuna. Yom Rav Huna Brei Rav Yeshua, Hai Namta Gamda, the Geresh Sharia. Oh, here's where we take out the English translation. When the going goes rough with the Aramaic. He says, the heartfelt felt of Neresh is permitted. So Neresh is the name of a place. And Namta Gamda of this place called Neresh is permitted. And Namta Gamda is hard felt. Now, what exactly is felt? He says felt, which is called Namta, was thick and hard. It did not warm the body, and therefore there's no Iser Kilayim. All right, I was hoping he would give me a little bit more of a Google here into what exactly is felt. I always thought felt was kind of like fur. I don't know if that's correct.
They say here it was thick and hard.
Right, that's all he says here is thick and hard. I was hoping you would tell me what this felt is made of. Apparently, there would be, under normal situations, if not for the fact that it's thick and hard, an Iser Kilayim here. But now that it's thick and hard, he says it doesn't warm the body. And therefore, there's no violation of Kilayim because he has no Hanas Levisha. So Big Day Kahuna Kosher. Rav Ashi says that Big Day Kahuna are crispy, they're hard. They're not like soft, linen that's very fine linen or fine silk or wool even. And therefore we should equate it with the statement of Rav Huna, who is matir namta gad medecheres. Now, this is all l'chor against the Gemara in Erechim. We'll have to see if we have time to go through the Gemara in Erechim. Oshma. Now the Gemara returns to the original suffix about Big Day Kunev nitnu lehenos mihen or lo nitnu lehenos mihen. And the Gemara quotes the following brisa: Big Day Kahuna hayotze bahen lemedina. Also, b'migdash, bein b'shas avoda, bein shlo b'shas avoda, mutar b'nei shebig day kuna nitnu le'enos mihen shmamina. If he's going out of Harabayis, and that's called Medina, then he cannot wear his bigdei kahuna. He lives at, in one part of the old city. He can't go home wearing bigdei kahuna. He can wear bigdei kahuna in the mikdash, and he can benefit from bigdei kahuna in the mikdash. And that's why the Brisa emphasizes bein shalom b'shasavod. And the Brisa spells it out without leaving us any room for detective work here. It says, "Mipnei bigdei kahuna nitnu lehenos mehem." Can't get more explicit than that. You see clearly that bigdei kahuna nitnu lehenos mehem, which is good news, because otherwise, as I said before, the Kohanim are going to have to strip themselves and change their begadim immediately, the very second that they finish the avodah. So the Gemara says there's a stira here from what it says in this Mishnah regarding Medina. Because did I say Mishnah? I meant to say Brisa. This Brisa clearly prohibits wearing bigdei kahuna b'Medina. So the Gemara raises the following question: Medina lo, is there no heter for a kohen to wear bigdei kahuna beyond the bounds of Har Bayis? Basanya, and this is called a Brisa Megillas Tainus, which records and enumerates all the days that the Chacham said we're not allowed to fast. They're happy and joyous occasions because of various miracles that took place. Is the Esriv v'Chamisha b'Teves. On the 25th of Teves, we don't fast. Why? Because Yom HaGrizim. There was a great nest, which again we didn't get to it yet, that took place on Har Grizim. Therefore, the Chachamim set up the day on which that nest took place, which is the 25th of Teves, as a Yom Tov. The Lo Misfad Bahu, you're not allowed to give a hesped at a funeral, and certainly you're not allowed to fast on those days. So what exactly was the miracle that took place on Teves the 25th, on Har Grizim? Shebikshu Kusir es Beis Elokeinu me Alexandrus Mokdon v'nosnu lahem. The Kusir, we're not exactly sure what their status is, but in any event, they lived on a mountain, and that mountain was Har Grizim. Somewhere near Shechem. So they put in a petition, a request to purchase Beis Elokeinu from Alexandrus Melech Mokta. What was the ultimate goal of these Kusim? They actually were evildoers who wanted to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. So they wanted, in effect, purchase the Beis Hamikdash from Alexander so that they could destroy it. Unesano lahem, and in fact, the Melech agreed to sell it to them. Bo vodiu es Shimon HaTzadik. They found out, and they notified Shimon HaTzadik he was the Kohen Gadol. So what did he do? Lavash bigdei kahuna, nisate bigdei kahuna, umeakire Yisrael ima. He wrapped himself in bigdei kahuna to make him look beautiful in front of the king. Umeakire Yisrael holchu ima. Most important, prominent members of the Jewish community accompanied Shimon HaTzadik to see Alexander and try to present the Jewish cause. They had a whole ritual, a whole procession in which they carried torches, Bechol Alayla, Hallelujah, Halalu Holchim Mitzad Zeh, Halalu Holchim Mitzad Zeh. Shimon HaTzadik, together with the Yekirei Yisrael, went on this side. The Kusim were also on the way to the king. Alexander Mitzad Zeh on the other side. Who's going to get there first? Ad she'ola amud hashachar. So there's like a race between Chas v'Shalom the Kusim and Shimon HaTzadik and his entourage throughout the night. Came in she'ola amud hashachar with daybreak. Amar lahem, the king turns to the Kusim and he says, Mi alol, who are these? Amrullah, the Kusim say, Yehudim shemardu b'cha. These are the Jews that rebelled against you. Kevan she'igia the Antipastres, which is a city in Judea, so there the king is going to check out. Zarcha Chama, the sun rose, Upagu Zevazeh, and Shimon HaTzadik was standing face to face in front of Alexander the Great. So the impression you get is certainly the Kusim got there first, and again presenting their lies and their accusations against the Jews to Alexander. Now Alexander is looking for the Jews. It looks very bad, and he actually comes in contact with Shimon HaTzadik and his group. Even Sharol Shimon HaTzadik, very famous Haggadah. He bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik. Amrlo, his servants turned to him, his sidekicks. Melech Gadol k'moschai yishtachel Yehudi zeh. Why would you choose to bow down to this Jew, this Jew boy? Amar lahem t'mus diyukno shel zeh v'natzachas lefonim b'beis milchamt. He says there is a malach, an angel, who looks exactly like Shimon HaTzadik, and he is granting me, accompanying me, and successfully defeating all my adversaries. And whenever I go out to battle with whatever nation it might be, this malach comes, and he has the dmus, and he fights my battles. How is Alexander able to win and defeat and subjugate all the enemies of the whole world? It's this malach that while I'm battling, he comes and he beats my enemies. And he looks exactly like Shimon HaTzadik. Amalahem, and now Alexander turns to the Jewish people, king of the Jewish people, Loma Basem, why are you coming to me? Amru, they said, Efshar, Shebayishim Ispalim Bo Alecha, V'al Malchuscha, Shaloti Charet. We pray inside the Beis HaMikdash on behalf of your kingship that it should be destroyed. Again, today we have a new kingship in these parts. Anyway, is Yasuch Ovdei Kochavim Lachrivo. And now these idol worshippers, referring to the Kusim, are tricking you to destroy the bias when we pray in this house of God, so that you will not, your kingship will not experience any downfall, any destruction. Who are these people that are misleading me into thinking that you Jews are rebellious against me? They told him, these are the kusim that stand in front of you, accusing us, the Jewish people, of rebellion. Take these kusim and punish them any way you want. You have my full geshpanka and protection. Miyad nikavum beikvehem uslaum bezinvei susehem. Wow, it's very heavy. Read the English translation here.
Doesn't sound good.
No, it's very gory.
Yeah.
But I'd rather read it in their translation to give you mine. It says, they pierced the Kuthians in their heels. See, I would have said with their heels. I don't know, he says in their heels. And suspended them from the tails of their horses. And they dragged them over thorns and thistles till they reached Mount Gerizim, which is the site of the Avodah Zarah of the Kusians. Kevan Shigula Gerizim, Karashu Uzra'u Karshinin. They plowed it and planted it with Karshinin vetch. Just that, what the Kusim wanted to do the Beis Hamikdash, this is what the Jewish people were able to do to the Kusim. With the protective license of the greatest king of the world, Alexander the Great. Osa Yoma Su Yontif, they made it into a Yontif day, and therefore the Bryce of Masechet of Megillas Tainis lists this as a day of Yontif, the 25th of Teves. But anyway, one thing's clear from this story, that Shimon HaTzadik was wearing the Bigdei Kahuna in Medina, outside of the Mikdash.
Right.
And the Gemara offers two answers. Ibais Ema, one answer is Re'uyim with Bigdei Kahuna. When the Brisa says that Shimon HaTzadik put on Bigdei Kahuna, he meant that they were beautiful garments, as beautiful as Bigdei Kahuna. They were fit to be used as priestly vestments. He says they were new vestments made according to the specifications of priestly vestments, but they were not consecrated. You're not allowed to wear Bigdei Kahuna outside of the Har Bayis. And now we're holding that these were Bigdei Kahuna, and Shimon HaTzadik was wearing them outside of the Har Bayis, but they were allowed to do so because of Eis Lasos Hashem Eiferus. And this was the only way that they had a chance of making an impact on the king and saving the Churban, protecting the Churban of the Beis Hamikdash. What number is that? At 35? It says, we thereby highlight going girls exalted position.
I think it's 33.
Okay. Oh no, 33 is on Eis Lasos Lashem Efer.
Right.
Now
Right.
I'm interested in the end here. That's connected to the next Gemara.
Right.
Chazan Knesses Notel Sefer Torah. The Mishnah says that they took the Sefer Torah and he gave it over to the head of the Beis HaKnesses. Nosnal Rosh Beis HaKnesses. The Kohen Gadol Omed Umekabe. The Gemara is now medayek that since they machabe the Rosh HaKnesses and the Sgan to take the Sefer Torah and then pass it on to the Kohen Gadol, Shma Mino, let's derive the conclusion that Cholkim covered the Talmud b'Mokum Arab, that we're allowed to give kavod to a Talmud even in the presence of his Rebbe. Now here, Rashi adds, not, I should say here in this Masechet, but elsewhere, in Sota, Rashi adds two words. Kavod la Talmud hagadol mimenu. So we're talking about a case of a Talmud who supersedes his Rebbe, and we're allowed to give him kavod in the presence of his Rebbe, and that's not considered demeaning to the Rav. And let's derive that from the fact that we're giving so much kavod here to the Chazan HaKnesses, to the Rosh HaKnesses. The Gemara rejects this. Omar Abaye. No, you're not allowed to give kavod to a Talmud in the presence of his Rebbe. Here it was mutter to pass on the Sefer Torah to the Rosh HaKnesses and to the Sgan, even in the presence of the Kohen Gadol. The reason for that is Kula Mishum Kvodo the Kohen Gadol. Whenever they pass on the Sefer Torah from one to the other, that's all covered of the Kohen Gadol. Because what they're doing, they're multiplying shares, the various people who are in the service of the Kohen Gadol. This one passes it to this and to him until finally the Sefer Torah gets to the head of the front of the line, meaning to the Kohen Gadol. And the Mishnah says, "V'Kohen Gadol omed u'mekabel v'korei michlal shehu yoshev." It would seem that during the period of time before he stood up to receive the Sefer Torah, he was sitting. So the Gemara asks, "Omar Mar." Here we look at some of the tests on the base. Ein yeshiva ba'azora el malchei beis David bilvad. Only a king is allowed to sit down in the Azor. So what does it mean to say the Kohen Gadol stood up? What was the head of him to sit down? Shneimar, passing in the Yomi, Vayovo HaMelech David Vayeshev L'fnei Hashem. The pasuk goes out of its way to say that it's a separate din in Melech David. He has license to sit L'fnei Hashem. No one else does. Even a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to have yeshiva in the Azara. The Gemara answers, Kida Omar Rav Chizda Bi Ezras Noshi. Now, this statement of Rav Chizda was in a different context, but Hachanami here too, we can borrow from Rav Chizda and say that when the Kohen Gadol was reading the Torah on Yom Kippurim, it was in the Ezras Noshim, and the Ezras Noshim did not have the sanctity of the Azara, and that's why he was allowed to sit, because anyone's allowed to sit in the Ezras Noshim. So the Gemara asks, Rav Chizda, you say you're borrowing from Rav Chizda, who elsewhere interpreted as Ein Yeshiva outside the Azara, say in the Ezras Kohanim, but in the Ezras Noshim, there is a head to yeshiva. Where did Rav Chisda make the statement that we're talking about the Ezra's Nashim? Aha. In the context of the following brisa, the Sanya, Heichon, where is the Makom Harabayis? And on that place, at that location, Korbo, he reads the Sefer Torah. Now we're talking about the mitzvah of Hakel. Azor, according to the Tanakama, this brisa, it has to be read in the Azor. But Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov disagrees, Omer, Beharabayis. Shenemar, with regard to Ezra, who brought a Sefer Torah for the benefit of the Olei Agola in Nehemiah Perek Ches, Vayikra bo lifnei harachov asher lifnei sharamoyim. Which means on the Harabayis, there was an open area that was connected to or parallel to the Shar Hamayim, the Omer of Chisda, that which the Tanakhama says they would read in the Azara. What he meant was, and again, this is the time of the Olei Agola, the Ezra's Nashim. Here too, with regard to the Kriya of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippurim, it was in the Ezra's Nashim, and there you were allowed to sit down. Okay, we'll stop here. Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Yeah, Shkoya, very good.
Okay, good.